Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we'll be diving into episodes 492 through 495, which will cover manga chapters 582 through 584. And this is where we get to see the beginnings of Luffy and Ace's Brotherhood, as well as the revolution of a third. Alright, so synopsis. With Luffy mourning the loss of Ace, we launch into a flashback showing the beginnings of how Luffy and Ace met and how their friendship eventually bloomed into a brotherhood alongside a new figure in a boy named Sabo. So, differences. There were just a couple handful of differences. The first one being that there was an added scene of Luffy being threatened by the bandits as soon as he entered their little house before learning that he was Garp's grandson, and then they all backed off. That scene was completely added in the anime. Also, during the tiger encounter in the anime, we see that Ace was about to step in to save Luffy had the bear not intervene, but this isn't really shown in the manga, as we just see a panel of Ace overlooking the little ridge with Luffy on the ground with the bear and the tiger already fighting. And so I guess the anime kind of took liberties with this and extended this scene and just interpreted that, yeah, Ace probably would have stepped in, but in the manga, you just see Ace kind of just like staring down at them. And then the last one is during Sabo's introduction to Dadan, after deciding to live with them, this whole scene is extended a bit as well with the addition of the fart jokes, which was really random because that's obviously not in the manga, as that's more of an auditory joke. I suppose you could do it in the comics as well. But Sabo throws in a couple extra insulting facts about her that Ace kind of relays to him, and one of them being that she's a shitty man among men, even though she's a woman, which she obviously corrects him. But yeah, those were most of the scenes that I saw were significant changes. There are a couple more where certain things are just extended a little bit more, like the fight scene between Porshemi and Ace and Sabo. There are a couple more of that, but yeah, most of it's just minor things. So let's get into the episodes themselves. So episode 492, I'm not going to go too much in depth on episode 492 since it's a completely separate filler special episode. So for 492, we get a non-canon special crossover episode with the anime series Toriko, and this was in celebration of the debut of the Toriko anime. And this episode was actually the second half of a 1 hour special, with the first episode of Toriko being part one. So that's why when you watch this episode, it seemingly starts in the middle of what seems like an ongoing story, because part one was actually episode one of the Toriko anime. And I actually tried reading Toriko, the manga, a long time ago, not because of this, just because it seemed like an interesting story. And I picked up volume one, but I just could not get into it. It was just way too weird and kind of boring for me. It does have a really unique premise where a gourmet hunter in Toriko travels like these crazy lands where he uses like his superhuman strength and abilities as well as his gourmet skills to find and battle ferocious animals and life forms to gather rare and unique ingredients and become a better chef. Now, this anime special was actually adapted from a manga special crossover, but the difference being that the manga version actually took place later on in the One Piece series, so the characters look a little different with some significant outfit changes. And one other kind of non-canon interesting thing that this episode points out is that devil fruit users won't sink and drown in whipped cream. I don't know how true that is, but it's clear that they don't. So that's one interesting, I guess, bit from that. But now that we've gotten that out of the, that weird detour out of the way, we can get back to the main story with episode 493. However, instead of seeing what happens with Luffy in the present, we immediately travel back into the past and we get a flashback to 10 years ago. And it's one that centers around Luffy and Ace and how their relationship began. We had been getting hints of this backstory all throughout Impel Down and Marineford, and this takes place shortly after Luffy's original flashback back in episode 4, where Garp takes Luffy out of Fuchsia Village for being influenced by Shanks and accidentally eating the Gomu Gomu no Mi. And right from the get-go, there are already a lot of interesting little tidbits here, even in just this opening scene. We learn more about what kind of a person Anne Marine Garp is, how he seems to have his grandson's ability to read people well despite their outward appearance and behavior, like how he knows that he can trust these criminal mountain bandits, because despite committing crimes in the past, they're deep down, potential to be good people. But we also see his sort of manipulative side, how he basically blackmails them into taking care of his grandkids in exchange for overlooking their crimes. And so Yeah, you've got sort of that mischievousness that Luffy has also inherited as well. It's also referenced again how Garp can actually hurt Luffy with a punch despite him being rubber, but unlike when we learned this fact on Water 7, it's a little different. Although one thing I'd like to amend is that I completely forgot that Oda has confirmed in an SBS answer that this is in fact not due to Haki, but in fact actually due to quote unquote love. And I don't know how serious this answer is, but it is canon technically. As Oda actually, I don't know, his SBS answer sometimes borders on comically like sarcastic to just downright absurd to actually serious. So it's hard to tell how serious this question or this answer is. However, even though this does seem like a joke answer, there might be more to this, as we have seen sort of the power of love give people some little extra flair, particularly Sanji, who on a couple occasions attributes some of his abilities to love. And then also Boa Hancock also does a lot of things in the name of love as well. Like when they both get fired up, and particularly when Hancock was fighting in Marineford, she mentioned the love is a hurricane, and all of a sudden start just bashing on pacifistas. And then there's Sanji, who got all fired up with the ordeal of love on Satori in the Skypiea arc. So yeah, it's interesting. I don't know how serious I should take this answer, but Oda has gone out of his way to confirm that it's not Haki that's actually doing the damage. We also get to see the character of Dadan for the first time, which is a character we've only seen in silhouettes up till now. And in those brief flashbacks from Ace, we do see Dadan from behind, but we never actually got to see her face. And seeing that these people are the people that Garp decided to leave Luffy and Ace to be raised by, I seriously wonder why he was surprised by the fact that they became pirates and not Marines. Like, they were literally raised by former criminals. I mean, but in all seriousness, we go on to see why he felt comfortable leaving them with Dadan and her gang, as she and her gang slowly start to care more and more about Luffy throughout this flashback. Now, we don't see a lot of that in this episode, but you do see the beginnings of a lot of it in this set of episodes. Yeah, they show some legit concern over them, and this yet another example of Luffy's sort of overall magnetic personality and sincerity really can win over anyone. And yeah, this might be a slight spoiler, but I personally really like Dadan. Like, she really begins to grow on you throughout this flashback, and there is a very, very great and powerful scene with her at the end of this flashback, or I guess I should say past this flashback. There is a really great scene, and it's one of my favorite scenes that stands out. But obviously, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about that when we get there in I think it's 10 more episodes. But we also meet Ace at a point in his life where, like we saw in the flashbacks, where he's still got a major chip on his shoulder and very standoffish to everyone, including Luffy, to the point where he's kind of a dick, spitting on him for the first time when they meet. And Luffy, to his credit, initially gets mad and offended, but he's reminded of the example that Shanks set of that it's not worth it to get this angry over being slightly disrespected. And even at the age of 7, he has matured somewhat and is even a little self-sufficient as a result of Garp's just Spartan-like training, just throwing him into the jungle a couple times. And one gag that I really cracked up is that scene where Dadan tries to intimidate Luffy that his life's going to be hard from now on, and that he's going to have to work insanely hard and expecting this kid to cry about it. But Luffy just casually accepts it and says, okay. But the thing that I love most that the anime does about this joke is that it takes this joke one step further. So in reaction to this surprising calm reaction from Luffy, Dadan smashes her head into the floorboards, which is in the manga. And it's just a visual gag. But by the next panel, she's fine in the manga and upright again. But in the anime, she does this in reality, and she gets her head actually stuck in the floorboards, and you can see the other bandits trying to pull her out of the floor. And I absolutely love this joke, because in the manga, it makes it seem like this was just literally a visual gag. It doesn't. It's meant to be like it happened, but not really. It's supposed to just really exaggeratedly show that she's really thrown aback by Luffy's just calm response. But in the anime, it actually happens in reality, and so now her head is actually stuck in the floorboards. And I don't know which who thought of that? But that was genius. Now, Ace at this point is certainly a product of his incredibly rough upbringing of not being wanted by anyone, but he is absolutely brutal in the beginning. Like, if Luffy wasn't Luffy and just a regular 7-year-old kid, he'd be dead 10 times over. Like, I can't really blame Ace for not wanting to warm up to anyone and not wanting to be nice to anyone, but my God. I mean, Luffy would have been dead. But yeah, at this point, everyone hates his existence and wants him dead, and even those that tolerate him don't seem to care about him very much, which I'm referring to Dadan and her crew. Garp just immediately turns around and hands him off to Dadan, and Dadan only reluctantly looks after Ace and just doesn't really care about him too much, to the point where she's not really emotionally invested. After being missing for over a week, after chasing after Ace this whole time, Luffy does eventually return. And to his credit, and probably to Ace's surprise, Luffy doesn't rat him out as the one who caused Luffy to get lost in the first place. And after 3 months of repeating the same routine, we and Luffy are introduced to the Grey Terminal, a lawless dumpster full of trash and sickness where people scavenge for valuables just to survive. And we'll get more into the Grey Terminal a little later and what it represents, but for now we see that Ace isn't as alone as we thought, as we get our first look at someone who will go on to be an important character in the lives of both Ace and Luffy. His name is Sabo, who, if you notice, is played by a very famous voice actress in anime, and that is the voice of none other than Junko Takeuchi, who is most famous for playing Naruto. So we have Naruto and Luffy, two of probably the biggest anime characters, voices sharing the same screen for the first time. At least I think it's the first time. And whenever I watch these episodes, I half expect Sabo to end his sentences with "Datte because it just sounds exactly like Naruto. And another fun fact about Junko Takeuchi is she also voices the original Gon Freaks in the 1999 version of the Hunter x Hunter series. And so, yeah, she's very prolific in terms of anime voice acting. And some people I remember at the time commenting on the fact that Sabo seemed like he kind of came out of nowhere, and it's weird that he's never mentioned by Luffy or Ace in the present at any point. But when you go back, Oda did leave a couple hints at Sabo's existence in two incredibly subtle ways. And the one more obvious one is when we cut back to the flashbacks of this particular time period during Impel Down and Marineford. We saw Luffy and Ace exchange their Sakazuki cups, and I pointed out that we can see the tiniest hint of a shadow of a third cup, which hinted at the fact that there was in fact a third person there. But there's even an earlier reference to Sabo that won't make much sense until we get to the end of this flashback, but it has to do with Ace's misspelled Ace tattoo on his upper left arm, which we first saw in Ace's first real appearance all the way back in Arabasta. Now I say first real appearance because technically his first actual appearance was on Drum Island, but that was in a flashback where he's asking about Blackbeard. Now Sabo and Ace are collecting money to eventually have enough to start their own pirate crew one day, in a method very similar to Nami when she was trying to buy her and Kokoyashi Village's freedom. Of course, Luffy hears this and gets even more excited and attached to Luffy, as his dream is to become a pirate as well. And Luffy as a kid, honestly, is too cute. Like, even when he's being insulted and being threatened, he's just incredibly cute. And honestly, one of the best jokes is when Sabo and Ace are arguing who's going to be the one to kill him. Luffy just unnecessarily blurts out, "Don't throw me into the water," giving away the easiest way to dispose of him. And Sabo just confused, why would anyone willingly give up that information? It's so funny. And would you believe that this joke was added to the anime as well? Like, whoever directed this episode or wrote this screenplay is an absolute genius, because like the jokes in this they fit so well and they add so much. And Luffy somehow inexplicably gets caught, which this in and of itself I will never understand how that happens, but this leads to the hilarious and classic Luffy's non-poker face, as he can't lie to save his life. And literally in this case, we've actually only seen this face once before, at least to my recollection, and that's when Sanji is questioning him about who ate all the food as they're sailing from Drum to Arabasta. But his face is so funny because of how obvious it is he's lying. It just stands out. Like, that same puckered lip to the side and the inability to make eye contact. And then I think equally funny is the supremely over-the-top shock of just how bad of a liar Luffy was from Porshemi and his gang of thugs. Like, this is classic Oda comedy with how he builds up these like intense moments of drama and then completely throws you a curveball with this absurdist comedy. And I use his face and the flapping hand wave whenever I'm trying to hide something in a joking way with other people too, because I love this this facial expression. Luffy then gets taken to a shack to be interrogated for information on Ace's whereabouts. But can we take a step back to talk about the fact that before even asking Luffy any questions, Porshemi takes a wooden mallet the size of a refrigerator and slams it into a 7-year-old child's head, who he doesn't know is made of rubber yet. Like, seriously, if Luffy had just been any normal child, again, he would have been dead long before they would have even had a chance to ask him any questions. Similarly to how Ace treated Luffy at the beginning of this. But on a more horrific note, it's really tough seeing Luffy tortured and beat up. Of all the terrible things that Oda has shown us, seeing little Luffy beaten and tortured like this is probably the worst thing we've seen so far. Even though all of this, he still won't rat out Ace and Sabo, showing his fierce loyalty right from the get-go. Luffy was prepared to die here because he was seconds away from dying had Ace and Sabo not shown up to save him. Like, Luffy's willingness to die for those he loved is basically something that he was just innately born with, it sounds like. Whether you call it foolish or brave, Luffy has never been afraid to put his life on the line for his loved ones. Even going back to standing up to Higuma in defense of Shanks, he was also prepared to fight and put his life on the line for Shanks' honor. Again, you could call that foolish or bravery. It doesn't change the fact that Luffy is always ready to get his loved ones' backs, even at the cost of his own life. And I really love the fact that, that because one thing that sometimes gets thrown around is how people say Luffy is only brave and stands up to strong opponents because he has superhuman powers, and that he would be just as afraid of as Usopp if he didn't have those powers. And this just proves that it doesn't matter if Luffy is strong or weak physically, he will continue to fight and risk his life for what he believes in. Kind of very similar to how Steve Rogers, or aka Captain America, fights, whether he's in his, super soldier form or he's in his weak, scrawny Steve form. He will still stand up and fight for what he believes is right. And in this moment, while rescuing Luffy, Ace does the exact same thing he did for Luffy when facing down Akainu, that ultimately led to his death, but this time he and Sabo were both able to take down Porshemi. Sabo does lament the fact that what he is doing is foolish, but for some reason Ace won't allow himself to back down. But one thing you notice with this instance is that it's not about his pride, as Porshemi didn't really insult anything like Akainu did to Whitebeard that made it seem like Ace became stubborn over that. There still is an element of foolishness, as Ace is unnecessarily taking a fight that they don't really need to, but there seems to be a deeper reason than just pride. Ace yells to Sabo that it's because he can't run from a fight once he's faced down someone, and it appears to come from a sense of proving himself, which relates back to that chip on his shoulder and his desire to feel like he's worthy of existing. Even Sabo questions Ace about this afterwards, but Ace just kind of dodges the question, and we will learn that there is even more to this whole sort of philosophy that Ace has down the line, but just not yet. Then we get an incredibly powerful and emotional scene for both Luffy and Ace, and let's talk about the Luffy side first. I think for me, this scene and the little montage of Luffy desperately trying to become friends with Ace earlier over those 3 months really points out just how lonely of a childhood Luffy has had up till now. He basically has no family to speak of. His dad, Dragon, is off being a revolutionary. His grandpa is busy being a marine. His mother seems to be out of the picture entirely. And we look at Fuchsia Village in the past, there weren't very many other kids. Now, sure, there are kids in Fuchsia Village, as we'll see in scenes, later on down the series, but it just seems like they were not there during that time. Sure, he has Makino at the bar, but she's also busy with her running her bar, and she's an adult. It really makes you realize why Luffy becomes so desperate and attached to people like Shanks or Ace, and why his nakama are so important to him later on. He grew up incredibly lonely for the first 7 years of his life, and even his time with Ace was pretty short, as we learned that Ace left 3 years prior to Luffy setting out on his adventure. And so he really only knew Ace from the ages of 7 to 14, and that's just 7 short years where he actually had a friend. And now moving on to Ace's side, where he has constantly shut almost everyone out of his life due to the sheer fact that he has gotten so used to the idea that no one wants him. And the next set of questions has got to be the most heartbreaking thing coming out of a 10-year-old's mouth. Like, will it be hard for you if I'm not around? Do you want me to be alive? I mean, my God, for a 10-year-old to like ask these questions about their own life is just sad. And to which Luffy immediately answers, of course, with no hint of ulterior motive, just like always, which hits Ace in a big way, although he still doesn't really show it. Luffy is one of two people that actually genuinely wants Ace around, which is a feeling I can somewhat relate to all too well, especially when I was a kid. And this is a monumental moment in Luffy and Ace's relationship, and you can see them instantly becoming bickering brothers in that moment, with Sabo kind of coming in to be the level-headed eldest brother, even though Ace and Sabo are roughly the same age. And with Sabo joining them, at Dadan's place, seeing the three of them play around with each other is so fun and heartwarming. It really makes you that much sadder that Ace is gone, as well as the fact that you get this dreaded feeling that Sabo isn't going to make it out of this flashback, knowing Oda's track record of characters in flashbacks, and combined with the fact that his large absence in the present day makes you really, really uneasy about Sabo. And Dadan honestly just keeps growing on me as a character. In that last scene of episode 495, and to close this off, this is absolutely another hilarious joke that they added. I feel like, well, it's actually in the manga too, but I feel like the anime makes it even better. Where she's trying to figure out what to do if Blue Jam comes looking for the kids, and she ultimately comes to the decision that they'll basically just have to act like they have no idea what he's talking about, and has her men practice lying, but they're all just as terrible of liars as Luffy, with the same facial expression. But what gets me the most is in the bottom right corner of that scene, you can see even their dog is terrible at lying with the same face. It's so funny. But yeah, that's where these episodes end. But before we end this episode, we have to talk about the new opening that accompanies episode 493, as well as going on to finish this arc. Unfortunately, if you're watching the Crunchyroll version, you will not be able to see this opening due to licensing issues yet again. And so you'll be continuing to see One Day. But this might not be Crunchyroll's fault, as Avex Media has always been pretty strict with the licensing of their music, which is a shame because this is easily one of the best opening themes in the entire series and one of my all-time favorites. And I've been waiting to talk more about this opening for a while now. I did mention a little bit about this in the rankings podcast, but here we go. So for the 14th opening in the series, we get Fight Together, performed by the legendary J-pop artist Namie Amuro in what would be her first turn at producing music for the series. And this isn't her first time singing anime themes, but this is, I feel like, the first time One Piece has landed like a superstar artist to sing one of their openings. Like, just to give you some perspective, this would be like if Beyonce sung a One Piece opening theme. She is an amazing singer, and I have been a fan of hers since I first heard her song Toe Moe in the Japanese version of the second Pokemon movie, Revelation Lugia, as a kid, all the way back in 1999. My God, I'm old. In my opinion, this opening comes pretty close to perfect in my eyes, with one other opening maybe surpassing it in terms of like perfect fit further down the line. I think that song and opening hits all the qualities of a perfect One Piece opening just slightly better, but I still like Fight Together more. As you know from my rankings episode from a few years ago, this is my third favorite opening in the series, and that is still true today. This is such a beautiful opening in every sense, like lyrically, visually, auditorily, and symbolically. Like, first off, the lyrics and the themes of this song are perfectly aligned with what's happening in the story. The song is about the fact that no matter how much distance is between you and your loved ones, they will always be there for you to give you courage and strength to move forward to the future. Therefore, you'll always be fighting together. And this, of course, most aptly applies to Ace, who can no longer physically be there for Luffy anymore, and he'll always be there fighting right alongside him, even from the great beyond. And we get to see that beautiful moment where the spirit of Ace is seen pushing Luffy into the future, similar to how Bellemare helped Nami out of Kokoyashi. However, this also applies to the fact that right now, all the Straw Hats are separated from Luffy, but are still fighting. And And in this opening, we get to see them all training hard to get stronger for him while they're all in their respective islands. And I won't get too far into this part as it's pretty major spoilers. But thirdly, this applies to also the loved ones that everyone has lost along the way. It's like from a thematic view of the totality of One Piece, they're all still there to fight together with them. Whether it's Kuina, Bellemere, Banchina, who's Usopp's mom, and Hiruluk, Olvia, Tom, or the Rumbar pirates. Like this is best reflected in my sort of absolute favorite moment in any of the One Piece opening themes or any anime opening in general. Like this sequence is so good. That incredibly heartfelt montage of the moments where each Straw Hat crew member joined Luffy for the first time, which is the perfect way both for remembering the past and a great representation of a pivotal moment in Luffy's healing in several more episodes. Again, it's a little spoiler, so I can't really get too far into that. And it sounds silly, but this song is just one of those songs that hits me on a deeper emotional level. Like, they're just something entertaining and fun to listen to and watch. Like, I kid you not, I tear up every time I get to this point in the opening. I don't know what it is, but it just hits you so hard. Now, this is a little bit more spoilery too, but this song, and in particular this montage of the crew coming together, is also just an overall celebration of the journey that we've been having so far, and kind of caps off what basically is the first act of the One Piece story, as the story is getting ready to head into the New World portion of the Grand Line. And whether it was intentional or coincidental, the second chorus actually pays tribute to this very fact with the line, "Sa hajimeyo atarashii sekai wo yondeiru," like, which translates to "So let's start, a new world is calling." Now, the song doesn't specifically say New World in Japanese the way it's referred to in the series, as the Grand Line New World is called Shinsekai, where Shin is new and Sekai is world. But in the song, it actually uses the word atarashi, which also means new, but it's more used like an adjective and describes the newness of something. Like an atarashi kuruma is a new car. So like shin is a prefix you put in front of a noun, whereas atarashi is an adjective that you use to describe something. And then the next couple lines, "No matter how many seas will separate us, I'll always be there for you," is basically referring to the fact that once Luffy starts adventuring through the new world, Ace will still always be there for him, just like he always has. And again, I love how in sync this opening is with what's happening in the story and what will happen. And this opening visually is just stunning too, with the use of such vibrant colors and contrasting colors as well, showing off all the varied locations that the Straw Hats are, along with the beautiful depictions of the sunset, of when Sabo, Ace, and Luffy are playing and having fun, to the flashback montage, which are done so well. And the montage doesn't recycle any art either. They're all completely reanimated, every single one of them, which is amazing. And it still somehow captures Oda's old art style and meshes it pretty well with his current art style, or I guess the current at the time. And lastly, I love that even the one Straw Hat that isn't physically here in this opening still has somewhat of a shout out, as the very last shot shows Luffy lifting up his left arm into the sky, just like they all did at the end of Arabasta, which is a little nod to Vivi as well. I mean, it's so amazing. Like, you can see why this is one of my favorite all-time openings, and it's the favorite of a lot of people too, I feel like, because it hits you on so many levels and in so many ways. And it's just a banger of a song that you don't grow tired of listening to, despite its kind of somber nature. It still does have an incredibly uplifting and hopeful message. Like, if you haven't seen this opening because you've only strictly been watching the Crunchyroll, go watch it immediately, because this opening is so damn good. And yeah, as you've seen in my rankings, the only two other openings that rank above this are A Brand New World and Kokoro no Chizu. Like, Kokoro no Chizu is still number one for me. I think that song is just, I just like that song more. I think it has that more adventurous and upbeat feeling, and that's just something personally I like. Similarly with Brand New World, they're just way more fun to listen to, even though maybe they don't hit me on as much of an emotional level as Fight Together does. But yeah, both Namiya Amuro songs, because she will go on to sing a second opening theme for the series much later on in the series, and it's again another banger. And in any case, we get the budding of a great and cute friendship that started off very rocky between a young Ace and Luffy, as well as newcomer Sabo. But on the next podcast, we'll see what awaits them, and we learn more about Sabo and his past as well. If you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment, and if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast if you want updates of new episodes and to see pictures of my manga collection and the other stuff. But as always, I want to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. I guess just a really short spoiler section. It's not really even a section, it's just a comment. But yeah, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. All right, so one thing I kind of wanted to talk about was the canon of Uta. So obviously last year we got the One Piece film Red, as well as episodes 1029 and 1030, which kind of go into Uta's background. And in those two episodes, it talks about how Uta and Luffy were actual childhood friends during that year when just after Luffy ate the Gomu Gomu no Mi and you know, before what the events of this flashback. And so, yeah, you know, some people might say, well, Luffy did have a friend in Uta who, you know, he spent some time with, but that part apparently, and this is still a little confusing to me too, so those two episodes, 1029 and 1030, as well as the events of the movie, are all not canon. Now, Uta as a character and as Shanks' daughter is actually canon. She does exist in the world of One Piece. It's just that the events depicted in those two episodes and in Film Red are not canon. So the only thing that's really potentially actually canon is the scene where Shanks finds Uta. And Uta does actually exist, as we do see in I forgot to look this up, but in the chapter where we see Shanks intimidating Ryokugyu on Wano, we see him kind of flashback to that moment, and he thinks of Uta. So Uta does exist in this world. It's just that I don't know that she ever met Luffy in the canon story. And so that's why I think it still kind of lends credence to the fact that Luffy was still a lonely child who didn't have any friends before Ace. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to talk briefly on Uta and her place in all this as well. But that's all, and hope to see you on the next episode. See ya!